Hello, everybody, especially newcomers. No, especially our regulars. We love you all. Thank you for coming. For those of you who don't know much about The Idler, it's a magazine edited by Tom Hodgkinson. Tom is here. Say hello, Tom.
Hi, Victoria. This is The Idler magazine, and you'll see if you read the cover carefully, this current issue has a piece by our guest this evening, Carlo Rovelli.
Hey, yeah, well, that's perfect. Carlo, where are you?
Hi, great to be here with all you.
Oh, cheers. Cheers.
Oh, that looks nice.
That looks nice.
I'm in
so
Canada, far away. I'm in a place
going to be talking.
London. I'm in a place called London on a river called the Thames, and there's a market down the road. It was called Covent Garden, but all this is in Canada. Actually, it's a fake one. It's a fake London.
That's right. Good. And there's Mark. Mark, say hi.
Hi there. Nice to say hello to everybody. I'm glad to say that
Mark
Carlo's
Vernon.
piece in the Idler magazine is not only about physics, but it's about philosophy as well. He knows his Aristotle, so I would recommend it to you.
Great. So in a second, Mark's going to be giving us a bit of philosophy of the week. He comes every week and gives us some food for thought. So I'll hand over to Mark in a second. So the Idler is a magazine, as I say. It's also an academy. We have loads of online courses to give you a break from your TV watching night after night after night. Much more fulfilling and much more interesting. So just one little bit of housekeeping. I've got a few questions already lined up for Carlo at the end. There's a Q&A at the end. If you've got a question for Carlo, Tom, or Mark, please will you send it to me in the chat, and I will choose as many of you as possible at the end. Carlo, I'll have to ask you to answer quite quickly because I know we're going to have a lot of questions at the Q&A in the last 20 minutes. So that's all. Welcome, and do keep going in the chat alongside. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Mark.
Hi, Victoria, Mark. Victoria, can you just hold a copy of Carlo's book up for everybody?
I am so sorry. Yeah, I've been sending you links, but here it is. And I'll send it to you again. Do buy it on bookshop.org on the Idler page. I've sent you, you'll all have seen a link, and I'll send one in the chat as well for you to follow. There it is. It's amazing. And Tom and Carlo, we're talking about it in a minute.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Tom.
Oh, brilliant. Mark.
Yeah, well, as COVID anxiety rises again, and even escaping to the Idler drinks isn't enough because Boris beams in somehow, I want to talk about the access that we can have to something that's unchanging, a perspective that is readily available to us, actually, but increasingly in the modern world, and we forget to take a look. And it is indeed to do with physics and the night sky. Aristotle, of all the many things that he said, he famously remarked that philosophy begins in wonder and ends in wonder. In a way, the activity of philosophy is to deepen your wonder. But I just want to twist that slightly and say maybe every day can begin in wonder and end in wonder. And this week of all weeks, the night sky is absolutely perfect for this, even in the real London, with minimal access to the stars because of the light pollution. The night sky can still offer something pretty dazzling, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere at least, because by night, you've got a very remarkable moon and Mars to look at. The moon is unmissable, approaching full moon now, probably rising about now, actually. So it'll be up high in the next couple of hours, and very close to it you can see Mars. Mars is very distinguishable at the moment because it's pretty bright. It's definitely got a red tinge, and you can always tell planets in the night sky because they don't twinkle. Stars twinkle because they're effectively point sources of light, whereas the planets, even their disk that you can't see with the naked eye, stops them twinkling in the sky, and so it's a steady light. It's a good tip to spot a planet. So you've got Moon and Mars by night, unmissable in the southern sky. It's about 50 degrees up in the sky. You sort of look up just over halfway, as it were. If you've got a decent horizon, you can also fairly easily spot Jupiter and Saturn as well, actually. Jupiter's pretty bright and Saturn is alongside it, getting closer. It's going to come into quite a close conjunction just before Christmas. So Jupiter and Saturn are pretty easy to find as well. If you're a morning person or wake up fretting about the day, then you can just look out of the night to the night sky again as well, because with these longer nights, you'll get a good view of Venus, which again is unmissable in the eastern sky, dazzlingly bright, beautiful white light. So look out at the night sky for these planets, which are like gifts to us this year of all years. I learned to look at them because I did a physics degree and did a lot of astrophysics options whenever I could. And my third year project was to measure the heights of mountains on the moon, would you believe, by sort of taking photos and measuring shadows and doing a bit of trigonometry. Now, it was completely useless as a bit of science, but it was an amazing experience because it meant that I got up in the middle of the night, like a kind of science monk, as the air was still and chill, to try and get some steady photos. And apart from it feeling a bit like an act of worship, it meant that I got to a telescope that was fairly decent size and could enter this kind of grey world of the moon. You almost felt you could go down the valleys and hide in the shadows and discover the edge of a crater. And it was a wonderful gift, actually, that you can sort of get access to just by looking online, of course. But it's wonderful that there's another world that we can pretty easily have quite a good look at, that is completely different. And there's something very relaxing about that, which I've never forgotten. That's part of the wonder, I think. Mars, too, the red light of Mars has its own magic. I'm very keen on Dante and the Divine Comedy, and as you may well know, in the Paradise, he rises through the heavenly spheres, which he feels take on the qualities and characteristics of the planet. And when he gets to Mars and the ruby light of Mars, he feels that it's about letting go. It's a kind of heavenly martial attitude, he thinks, that's not like the earthly martial attitude that's about defeating your enemies. The heavenly version is a kind of inner sacrifice that's about letting go of your anxieties in order to enter the flow of life. So the light of Mars is a really good influence for us to enjoy as well. So close to the moon, so easy to access, right alongside the moon at this particular point in the year. Good timing for us. So I wanted to evoke a bit of the wonder that you or I, just by looking out of the window, can have at the beginning and the end of the day. It may well be that Carlo now talks about some of the more complex wonders that physics and astrophysics throws up for us. That's a way of deepening your wonder, as Aristotle invited us to do too. But at the very least, when you next hear Boris's voice intruding on your calm and stirring up, then just look out the window, look south at night, look east in the morning, and take in some of the light of the planets. Tom.
Mark, thanks so much. Now let's go over to Carlo, who is in Canada. What are you drinking this evening, Carlo? No, what time is it there? It must be lunchtime. Let's just unmute here. Carlo, oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at that drink. What are you drinking?
It looks like fantastic red wine, doesn't it?
It does. Is it Coca-Cola?
No, it's a fruit juice. It's a fake.
Oh, I'm so disappointed. I thought Italians drink all day long.
I know. And then when they have to talk online, they better stop.
Yeah. Now, what brings you to Canada? Because well, let's introduce Carlo again. Your books have sold millions of copies all over the world. They're books about time and quantum mechanics and physics. The latest book that we're talking about today is called There Are Places in the World Where Rules Are Less Important Than Kindness. And it's a collection of essays which were originally written mainly for Italian magazines and newspapers over the last 3 years. And I have to say, everybody, they're very accessible. It's a lovely collection. You'll learn a lot and be massively stimulated and entertained as well. Now, before we talk about the book, what are you doing in Canada? You're working out there on an amazing physics project, am I right?
I am, this is not my main place of work. I mean, I spend my time between France, Marseille, where is my university. I'm connected to Italy, which is my hometown, Verona. And here, well, I'm here in part because my girlfriend teaches here. So I took advantage of the possibility of moving to stay here. And because there are great research institutions here. There's Perimeter Institute nearby, which is physics, and there is a Rotman Institute of Philosophy. I'm visiting both. I'm sort of visiting both. I'm in principle visiting both. Actually, I'm staying home. I'm staying home on the time and talking with my friends via Zoom, like now.
Yeah. So how's lockdown been for you? Have you been in Canada for the entire period since March?
I came here when it started, just in late February, thinking of staying a little bit, but then I've stayed here most of the time. I only went briefly to Italy during the summer when things seemed to be better. Then I came here. Look, I'm deeply saddened by what is going on, but I'm happy to stay home. And on the one hand, I think that, it's not just a matter of respecting regulations. I think the more we do, the more we practice social distances, the better it is. It's not a yes and no thing. I think I feel it's my little minusculous contribution to everybody's effort to stop traveling and staying home. And for me, it's not costly actually, because I have my book. There is Zoom. I have things to do, calculation to finish, things to write. It's easy for me.
And after all, we didn't used to Zoom around the globe, and we still managed to communicate with each other. I mean, let's talk about Aristotle. His ideas somehow managed to travel all over the world, particularly in the medieval period. He was obviously big at the time in 3rd, 4th century Athens, BC. And, people didn't have Zoom and they didn't have aeroplanes, but ideas happened and people had time to reflect. I mean, do you think the lockdowns actually do give people more time for philosophical reflection?
I don't know. I mean, one of the greatest jumps ahead in science of all the times was during the plague in London. When a guy called Isaac, his last name was Newton, had to retreat on the countryside and was forced to stay alone for a long period, and came out with basically the basis of what is modern science today. I mean, mechanics, the gravitational, universal gravitation, optics, were all done by Newton, and the good part of it was thanks to the plague and to the social distancing.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. I didn't actually. I knew. I think we knew from Ronald Tupman, the historian, that there were lockdowns during Tudor times. So Shakespeare, for example, would retreat and just write in a room for 3 months. You're telling us that it was the same with Isaac Newton. That it was basically a sort of period of enforced idling that led him to revolutionize modern science.
That's right. I don't know if it was compulsory. But certainly for its own safety, he thinks he had the means to do that. He was rather well off, Newton. He could retreat to the countryside and try to stay away from the plague, which of course he succeeded. And is a big chunk of his main scientific work was done thanks to this retreating in the countryside. So maybe in the current moment, somebody, I don't think that everybody will be Newton just by staying home, but maybe there is a little bit more of thinking. At least we can hope so.
You also say somewhere in your work, we sent the quote out this week to our followers and readers, that Einstein spent an entire year wandering aimlessly, and you also believe that was at the foundation of his thought.
Oh yeah, that I'm pretty convinced actually, because following Einstein thinking, Einstein for guys like me is a myth, is a great hero. The amount of things that he has done in science is immense. It's just incomparable. I think Newton is the only one you can compare to Einstein. They are towers in the steps ahead of humankind and understanding nature. And Einstein was very rebellious as a young man. He studied in Germany and had a lot of difficulty in high school to adapt to stand the harshness of the German education. He could not stand authority of no kind. He was a good student, but it was clashing with his environment, to the point that his family moved to Italy, and Einstein, he was still in high school, decided to drop out essentially, and just go where his family was in northern Italy and do nothing. And he spent 1 year doing nothing, just being lazy and going around reading. We actually know that as a young man, he read Kant entirely, talking about philosophy. And some historians realize that in his spare time, he was in Pavia, a small town in the northern Italy, and he would go to the university classes of physics in Pavia just by curiosity, not because he was enrolled in the university of anything. And I believe this freedom of him to just wander following his own curiosity, not staying in the rail of a formal education, was absolutely crucial for his major explosion of creativity that came after a while. Of course, after that, I mean, after this period, 1 year, he did nothing. He joined the university in Switzerland and got a proper education in one of the best places for studying science at the time in Switzerland. And so it's not that he didn't have the full support of the culture and the cultural university could offer, but he took it with his own time, his own way. And I think that today it's a pity that young people are not allowed to do that. It's very hard for a young person today to do that. Culture is wonder, as Mark was saying at the beginning. It's just being amazed by something, curiosity. That's what should drive it. If you keep the young people into the rails, they just stay into the rails the rest of life.
In a sense, these two tendencies in science and philosophy and life in general have been at loggerheads for a very, very long time. In your essay about Aristotle in the book, it's fascinating because you say the essay is a defense of philosophy in the scientific world, and you know there are scientists now or now-ish, e.g. Stephen Hawking you mentioned. You know, philosophy is useless. What's the point of it? Which sounds like a modern idea. And you say, well, actually, you know, even in ancient Greece, when Plato popped up, Plato was talking about pure ideas, and there was another. He didn't call himself a philosopher, another sort of sophist or a leader of an educator in ancient Athens. He said all this stuff that Plato talks about is completely useless.
That's right. It's Socrates. Athens had many schools actually for the young kids, because boys, not girls, of Athens to get their education. There were some schools, and the two main ones were the one by Plato and the one by Socrates, and there was a competition between them, sort of like Oxford and Cambridge, something like that. But they had different methods. And Plato's idea was that you should not teach the young men to the practice for becoming politicians or lawyers or artists or writers. Rather, you should teach the foundation. You should teach them to think what is justice, what is the truth, what is politics, how does the how does a group of people come together and get organized? What is beauty? What is art? So the foundations of everything. And that was, and he called this not wisdom, but the love of wisdom, right? Philosophy, love of knowledge. And Socrates had a completely different method. He was teaching, the practice of being a good lawyer, a good politician, a good artist, and so on and so forth. And there was a polemic, and we have a book. In fact, we have part of the book written by a young, very brilliant young student in the school of Plato, arguing that Plato was right and Isocrates was not right. And this brilliant young kid, his name was Aristotle. And he has all the arguments that explain why Plato methods is right, namely asking the foundational questions helps for everything. And I think that today, I know many of my colleagues, scientists, like physicists in particular, like to treat philosophy not with great respect. I think they're completely wrong, because that's my idea. Because if you look at the history of physics, science in general, it was deeply influenced by philosophy, and vice versa. Philosophy has been always deeply influenced by the science of the time. It's a long conversation culture in which different forms of knowledge, each one with its own methods, goes ahead, produces new tools for thinking, and these tools are shared, and that's how our culture goes. This is what I think is science and is philosophy, but it's also true for literature, for art, for everything. Civilization is it's a wide conversation between very different ways of thinking and going ahead.
I think that's what's so lovely about the book, is that your references are so wide, and there's literature and philosophy and astronomy and science. Now, tell us a bit about your own education. You say in the book that you came from conservative Verona to Bologna in the 1970s, and Bologna was actually quite a sort of hotbed of radical ideas at that point. And like Steve Jobs and like many other people, I think you took LSD, and you attribute your psychedelic experiences to your sort of interest in physics and so on.
Yeah, it was a cultural shock for me to move from Verona to Bologna. I mean, they're two old Italian cities, 100 kilometers apart, very, very, very nearby, but they have a completely different culture. I think in the UK is similar. Actually, I'm not sure in the UK is similar. You can get such a huge cultural difference between one part and the other of the country. I think Italy is more fractured because of its historical fragmentation in the past. But
yeah, because Italy was all about city-states, wasn't it? I mean, it only became a country quite recently, really.
Yes, it was city-states, and were very culturally different also. Venice was different from Florence, and Florence was different from Rome, profoundly different for a long time. And Italy got together not even 200 years ago. So the culture is still different from town to town, which is also an element of richness. Of course, cultural diversity is always good. But for me as a kid, moving from Verona to Bologna was really an incredible shock, because Verona is it's very bigot. Do you say this word? And it's very closed, and Bologna is the opposite. Bologna is an incredibly open-minded and diverse city.
Wasn't Bologna wasn't the first ever university created?
Oh yeah. I hope there are people in the audience who come from Cambridge or Oxford, and I can say that Bologna is older than Oxford.
It's really old, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few years of difference, but Bologna claimed to be the oldest university in not in the world, because there's some school in Morocco which are older and that claim to be an older university. Of course, what you mean by university, one can equivocate what it means to be the older, but it's very old. And Copernicus studied in Bologna, and then in Padova, and me too. I studied in Bologna and then in Padova. So I'm very proud of having the same path of Copernicus. And I like to think about Copernicus because Copernicus, he was sort of Polish or whatever was at the time the region he came from, and spent most of his life in Northern Europe, in what is now Poland. But he got his education in Italy in the Renaissance, and he came to Bologna. And what did he find in Bologna? He found two things. He found the knowledge of antiquity, the books of Ptolemy, Archimedes, Euclid, the Arabs from Baghdad, the astronomers, So all this enormous knowledge that humankind has put together, and in the university in Bologna, there were the books, and there were the people who could read the book, understand, explain him. But that's only half of the story, because that knowledge had been available for so long, for so many people, for centuries. And nobody took the immense step that Copernicus took. So what else he had as tools for doing that? I think that in Bologna, he found something else. He found the spirit of the Italian Renaissance, which was, let's change everything. Let's start from scratch. Let's be ready to throw away the past and invent a new way of being. It was a combination of these things, the acquired knowledge, the accumulated knowledge, which of course he immersed enormously. And he studied Ptolemy totally, profoundly. I mean, what Copernicus did is profoundly based on the knowledge of the time. Can I, when Mark was reading about the sky, it came to my mind the beginning of the book of Ptolemy. And so while he was speaking, I searched it on the internet. I found it. Can I read it? It's just 2 lines.
No, read it. Yeah.
I know that I'm mortal by nature and ephemeral, but when I trace my pleasure the windings to and fro of the heavenly body, when I look at the sky, I study the sky. I no longer touch the earth with my feet. I stand in the presence of Zeus himself and take my fill of ambrosia, the drink of the day.
That's Ptolemy writing.
That's Ptolemy writing. That's the opening
Really?
of his book. His book is probably the greatest science book of antiquity. It's an immense book on which Copernicus built. And the way he says, he starts by saying, look at the sky. And it's exactly what Mark was saying. All the, the everyday smallness of our life and the tragedy and the mortality and the you're taking away by this beauty and this sense of wonder, and you feel like you're a god who's drinking the drinks of the god. My work as a scientist is similar. I mean, this is the same feeling, I think, that every
Sounds really good.
Yeah, I mean, no, wait, let me be precise. Most of the time, nothing works. You're desperate, you're depressed, things don't work, experiment don't work, theory don't work. But then the wonder, the curiosity is what brings up. So let me conclude where I was going, because you asked me about my own experience in Bologna. I think I found the same thing as Copernicus, namely, on the one hand, a fantastic body of knowledge. That's what university is. And at the same time, and that's also what university should be, the spirit of the courage of questioning that knowledge and rebel to that knowledge, building on that, not just on the basis of nothing, but being curious, being courageous, think your own way, go ahead. And Bologna was incredible at that time. This was the 70s. It was not just Bologna, of course, was youth of all over the world was trying to dream strongly for a better world. There is a better world possible for all of us, more kind. The kindness of the title of my book is the same kindness of that we young people were hoping for, a world without armies, without barriers, without borders, and more, without religion, without family, without anything, maybe very radical, including the LSD. That was a big experience at the time.
So you started with a sort of thoroughly anti-bourgeois project. Do you think that philosophy and science and the kind of science that you're studying and communicating could actually lead to peace, less war, less crazy politicians and so on?
No, I don't think that science by itself it's going to achieve anything like that. I think that, I mean, if I sometimes write about political dreams, I write that as a citizen, as a human being, not as a scientist. Science by itself, it's an extraordinary tool for thinking about the world. It's something that might open the mind. But science is a tool with a lot of limitations. We see it in the pandemics. that can be used in all possible ways, can be bent to different aims. I mean, the capitalist world, like the Soviet world, like Nazism, everybody can use science at its own ways. Science by itself, I think, I don't want to say that science is neutral, but it's just the ensemble of things we know and the process to learning more. But it has directly little to do with the choices that we make. That's one of the reasons which I think in the current pandemics, it's wrong when politicians say, I want to follow science. Politicians should take into account science. If they don't, they're stupid or not effective. But the decisions are political decisions. And I think the world that we can build depend on what we want about the world as political beings, not as scientists.
Now, on that, there's a great essay in the book which is really relevant to what we're going through at the moment, because you talk about how most people don't really have much understanding of statistics. Statistics should be taught better to people. And I think over the last few months, you know, we've all been subjected to loads of graphs, and we sort of argue about I rates or whatever they're called. And people are kind of starting to educate themselves about statistics. But you say statistics can really mislead. You know, facts can be lies in a way.
Statistics is an incredibly powerful tool. In fact, some of the best successes today to tame the epidemics has been obtained just thanks to statistics. So statistics is extraordinarily powerful. All of science is based on statistics because you make measurement and you have to interpret them, and you need statistical methods. But it's not easy. It's tricky, and it's very easy to get the wrong intuition about statistical fact. In the book, I have a little story in which we, when I was a professor in America, in my physics department, we all, know all professors, we got completely sidetracked and misinterpreted an excess number of people getting ill for illness in the department. We all panicked thinking that there was some cause, and we just didn't realize that it was perfectly understandable statistical fluctuation. So statistics is not simple, but it's not horrendously complicated either. And I think the modern society lacks statistical education. I think statistics should be taught at school much more, so we had better idea of what is the meaning of correlation, fluctuations, and all these kind of things, and we would understand things better. In a situation like a pandemic, statistics is fundamental. Some countries, let's not forget that some countries, Taiwan, which is an open society, has had a few tens, 10, 20 people died for a death attributed to the COVID, to be compared with tens of thousands or more in my country or in the UK. And the way to deal with that was statistics. The tool for that was statistics. The subtle point, I think, is that statistics is about uncertainty, but it's dealing with uncertainty. That's what science is capable of doing. So uncertainty doesn't mean I don't know, I'm in the dark. It means that we can find the best strategy in the lack of complete information, which is the usual situation we humans are. We never are certain about anything. There's no certainty. But we have a lot of partial knowledge. And the way to use partial knowledge and navigate at best with partial knowledge is what statistics allows us to do. Let me make a very simple example. Governments give indications, stay home, close the bar, and properly, people follow these indications. I mean, when they do, when they don't, bad. But these are indications. It's not that if we don't do that, don't follow the indication, we all become ill, and if we follow the indication, it's fine for society. It's not like that. So these are indications, statistics, probability. So I think if we all considered fighting the pandemics as a shared responsibility in which each of us, not just for saving ourselves, but for saving the others, do our best. You know, the probabilities of getting ill will be much lower, and the total outcome for the society will be much better. That's one of the reasons I decided to stay here and not to travel. I mean, it's irrespective of what is allowed or not allowed to do. I think we should all do our best. I mean, some people have to go out, of course, because they need to, but some people who might stay home, I think they better stay home.
So you're in approval of the lockdown measures, more or less?
I beg your pardon?
So more or less, you do approve of the various lockdown measures that governments have put in place, you know, the sort of restrictions on movement and so on?
I do, not as a scientist, as a citizen. It's an issue of values, right? Whether we value more people dying younger, a bit younger, or whether we value more people getting more poor. This is nothing to do with science. What science can say is, look, if you take this measure, that's a likely outcome in terms of economics, in terms of health. If you take this other measure, that's the other outcome. And so ignoring this indication is foolish. But then the choice is political, it's not scientific. And as a citizen, I think that it's great if we all together contribute to making our life longer, not to fighting death, because we all die anyway. But we want to live a little bit more. So I'm grateful to society who allows me to live more, give me more years of life, because life is precious. Having said so, I also think, since you ask, that the economical cost that is needed, because you have to slow down economical activities, for that, in a society which is strongly non-equal like ours, full of inequality, economical inequality, should be put on the shoulders of those who have a lot, and not on the shoulders of the majority of the population who have little. So I don't understand why, to save some life, we have to increase the poverty of the weakest part of the society, when there is a layer of society which has a huge amount of wealth, which we don't touch because, because they're powerful.
Now, on that subject, before we move back to Mark and then on to questions, Carlo, thanks so much for these wise thoughts. It's fascinating to listen to. Rousseau. Now, you talk about Rousseau's discourse on inequality in your book, and for people who haven't read it, I did it at school, I think. His basic argument is, everyone used to be equal, and then money and greed came in, and everything went wrong. And that's a sort of essential. And then he was teased for this idea that's so patronizing, noble, savage, and people say Rousseauvian ideas are ridiculous. Life is getting better and better, not worse and worse. But you say that actually that there's a lot to it, and recent anthropological work is pointing up to the fact that actually there were, or are even, societies which had more equality, where wealth was more equally shared.
Yeah, let me anticipate saying that I'm not an expert in anthropology or in prehistory. That article is that I put in the book because the topic fascinates me. I talk about the fascination about this topic, and I was reporting me reading a book. It was a review of a book I read written by an anthropologist and a historian of the prehistory, who make this point. They say that it's a book. The argument is complex, but essentially, our species exist since 200,000 years, whatever, and for most of these 100 millennia, the social structure of humankind was not hierarchical; it was egalitarian. and the hierarchical structure, which we share with some of our cousins, primates, but not with others. So it's not clear looking at the other primates. The separation in classes, the powerful and the weak, the rich and the poor, only came with the Neolithic revolution. So very, very late in the history of our species, say 10, 20,000 years ago. I got a lot of reviews of this book, and this article touched some nerves. One review said, "Oh, come on. Why the Rovelli talks about that is not his field. He doesn't understand anything. Things are not like that." And another review says, "Oh, why the Rovelli says about that? Everybody knows like that. Everybody who knows the field knows that this is the case. He's saying trivialities." So I don't know. I'm not an anthropologist again, and my understanding is that the field inside is divided. So is the long-term history of our species, I mean, before the Neolithic Revolution, before in long prehistory, were we as humans egalitarians or not? It seems to me that there is an indication that yes, but it's disputed. But that's not the point in a sense. I think that I would like to see a diminishing of the huge amount of inequality that is existing today in our societies. And I don't buy the arguments that we need inequality because so we all become more rich. Especially, I don't buy this argument in a moment in which a pandemic is taking away things from us. So once again, there is a scientific part of the story, but there's a political part of the story.
Now let's talk quickly about your new book, which is called Helgoland, and this is.
Oh, I'm happy. You make me happy to talk about that.
What's the methodology? What's this new book about?
Now, can I share a secret? But you guys shouldn't tell anybody.
We won't tell anybody at all. No, we'll keep it to ourselves.
Don't tell anybody, and especially I'm told that perhaps Annabel Axley, my Penguin editor, it might be in the audience. I tried, but haven't seen her. Annabel, if you're there, close your eyes. This is the cover of the book of the new book. But I don't have the permission to share to anybody, so don't tell anybody that I've shared it. It's an island. You see the island here? This is the island, and it's a place.
It looks like quite a scary island. I mean, it doesn't look very friendly.
No, it's not friendly at all. It's a teeny island in the Northern Sea, sort of between Denmark and Germany and UK's distance, without trees, windswept, very wild, very rough. And in 1925, a young 23 years old man had the key idea of quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics is probably the greatest revolution of all the time because it changed our understanding of reality in depth. Quantum theory is the core of modern physics, more than Einstein, more than relativity, more than Copernicus, more than Ptolemy. It has taught us that matter, things, objects are very different than the way we think about them once you study them in detail, completely different. They're sort of wavy, they're funny connected among themselves. It's a very complicated story, which is still much debated. So the book is my attempt to explain somehow this theory to people who don't know about it much or heard about it but little, and try to make sense of it. I've spent my life trying to make sense of quantum mechanics, and that's my attempt to say this is what I've understood about what this theory is telling us about the world.
Well, that's going to be an absolute treat. Carlo, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to go to the questions now in a second. Mark, would you like to comment on, I mean, Mark, Carlo picked up on your introduction about wonder and gazing at the stars. Before we go to questions from our audience. Is there anything that Carlo's thoughts sparked off in your considerable cranium?
Thank you very much. I mean, as a sort of not completely ignorant lay person when it comes to physics, I just wondered, do you expect to see another Einsteinian moment in your lifetime, another 1905? Because it feels like modern physics and quantum physics in particular is astonishing. And yet it feels increasingly like something major is being missed. And I partly say this because my tutor when I did my physics just undergraduate degree was Carlos Frank. And I always remember that he had a poster outside his study when I was an undergraduate, which was quite a while ago now, which said, "Dark matter, does it exist?" And I keep in touch with him, and he still has that poster outside his study, "Dark matter, does it exist?" And it's just from a sort of high level, for all the, you know, the knowledge, for all the developments, for all the science often is gradual, I just wonder whether physics in particular is going to need another sort of like big twist, another kind of electromagnetism moment, another quantum physics moment, another relativity moment, and whether we might even see that.
1905, when Einstein did special relativity, was very strange. You correctly refer to it as a particularly shocking moment because there was a lot of confusion, perceived as confusion and tension, things not coming right. And then there was a single paper by a single man who basically clarified everything. And people said, wow, yeah. The story goes that in Poland, in Krakow, in the university, there's this old professor, sort of darkish big hole. And at some point, one door slams open and this old man come out screaming and says, "Ah, the new Archimedes is born," Einstein, because he has got it right. It's got it right. But Archimedes shouting "Eureka, Eureka," because he has understood how things float, or Einstein 1905 is rare. There's moments in which this happen on big and small things, but most of the time that's not the way science has gone ahead. When you mentioned electromagnetism, we now view the work of Maxwell, Faraday and Maxwell, as an immense step ahead. They replaced mechanics with field theory. They understood that there are fields in the world. It's just a huge step ahead. Modern physics built on the idea of Maxwell and Faraday. But if you think at the time, if you go historically at the time, Maxwell was just one of the many theories discussed around. It was a set of equations, we're not clear exactly what it is. It took some time to clarify the mathematics, and then it came Hertz, and only at the moment that Hertz did the measurement, people say, "Oh yeah, that's maybe right. It's better than the others." Theories, there were 5 or 6 theories going around, and then slowly came out, and it took another 30 years to understand what exactly was the point. It took Einstein to understand what exactly was the point about Maxwell being fields and not waves on something else. Even Einstein's greatest theory, which is after 1905, which is 1915, which is general relativity, he wrote these papers. But yeah, I mean, he became famous at some point because of measurement that sort of confirmed it. But then for several decades, general relativity was a sort of fringe thing. It's only in recent times that it has been so clearly, we found black holes, we found gravitational waves, we have found expansion of the universe, Big Bang, all the things predicted by general relativity, fantastic. And now we look at Einstein at absolute awe, because in his equation, there's all that. So what I'm saying is that, no, I don't think that we're expecting the snap. I think the ideas are out there. There's a lot of work, and we have to understand which ideas are correct. And slowly we have to clarify, it will become clear. We talk about Copernicus. Copernicus published this book in 1500. At the time of Kepler and Galileo, it still was totally not clear whether it was a good revolution or just some confusing stuff. And it's 150 years later. So after the fact, most of the time, much later, you recognize a good idea. Maybe the good ideas are there. Maybe somebody who I dislike a lot is the one who had the good idea. It seems wrong to me. Maybe my friend have the right idea. I think we're not stuck in fundamental physics. It's just a moment of, you know, looking around and trying to get organized and finding, looking for experimental confirmation that tell us that ideas which are around are right or wrong.
Thank you.
Victoria, should we go over to some questions from the idlers out there?
Yeah, great. We've got loads, so we're going to speed through them if that's okay. And I'm sure each one could be a whole speech by Carlo. But Carlo, we don't have time.
Very, very, very short.
Very short. Could we start? I think we've got to start with Derek Fenton, who's in Australia, and we've got lots of Australian fans, but he's had to put his alarm on at 4 a.m. to come on to a drink with the idler. So Derek.
Thank you. What is his name?
Derek.
Thank you, Derek.
We've lost you, Derek, but I'm going to read it for you.
Okay, yeah.
What came first, the particle or the field?
Ah, fantastic question. It's a very hard question because it's a core of quantum theory. In a sense, it's a topic of my book, if you want. I mean, because from the perspective of electromagnetism, is clearly a field. I mean, light is a field, and modern physics is based on fields, field theory. But then this is a quantum field theory. The way fields manifest themselves are particles, so they are not two different things. They are different descriptions of the same thing. And the way they stay together, these two descriptions, is subtle because of quantum theory. It's not, so there's no one or the other answer here.
Okay. Can we go on to Alison Liebling? Alison.
Hi, thank you. Wonderful talk. My question was, you travel a lot, and I wondered if there are places where these relationships between art and science work better than they do in places like the UK, the US, the very neoliberal economies. Have you come across places where these relationships seem less sort of oppositional?
It's a good question. I wouldn't know how to answer. But I think that there is, you might be a little bit pessimistic. I've seen a lot of artists being interested in science recently, and some interest of science toward art recently. So I think that this separation is melting a little bit. That's my impression. I got all sorts of artists that try to get in touch, saying, you know, I'm interested in science you're immersed on, and musicians, playwrights, painters, sculptors. So let me try to be optimistic. I think that the reciprocal interest, it's growing, especially in places like London.
Does that answer your question, Alison? Great, super. Can we go to John Lloyd, who is a big idol of friends, great TV comedy producer, Carlo, here in the UK, and also radio presenter. Are you there, John? Now, he did send me a question on the chat, but he seems to have left, so I'll go back to that in a minute. Could we now have Are you there, John?
Yeah.
Hey.
I unmuted myself.
Don't want that at all.
John, you're supposed to be an expert at TV and as a seasoned producer. It's a fairly basic procedure.
So not. But Carlo, I love everything you write and everything you say. You're amazing. I've got lots of your books. But I wanted to ask, so you mentioned the Perimeter Institute earlier. And so Lee Smolin is somebody that I know. And I wanted to know what you thought of his book, The Trouble with Physics, which basically says that for nearly 30 years, physics has not discovered anything fundamentally new, which is interesting to me. What do you think?
Okay. First of all, for full disclosure, Lee is a great friend for me. We did, I guess we did our best scientific work together. So, and not just a collaborator, it's much more than that. It's a dear friend, and I respect him enormously, both scientifically and as a human person. I think that book is very good, extraordinarily good, because it points on some problems in contemporary theoretical physics, but I don't think at all the book is so negative as you say. I think that this book has been reviewed as saying that by people who were offended by the book because Lee was criticizing some attitude of some part of the research community, in my opinion, correctly. In the last 30 years, there have been a lot of ideas in fundamental physics. None of this has been confirmed. So it might be that none of the ideas of the last 30 years turn out to be right, but it may very well be that some of the ideas in the last 30 years will turn out to be right, including, I mean, ideas in the field, in the camp in which I work, and in the opposite camp. This is not a good and bad separation. So I would agree that there has been a certain sterility if you compare to the incredible sequence of success of theoretical physics from 1870 to 1970. But I wouldn't say that theoretical physics stopped, not at all. I mean, it might be that some of the ideas which are in the literature and people discussing today will be considered 20 years in the future the great achievement of the early 21st century.
Well, what I'm saying, Carlo, is that we don't know where 95% of the universe is, as you know, because there's dark energy and dark matter, these two quantities that we don't understand or don't know where they are. And I wonder if echoing what Mark was saying earlier, we're on the brink of a Copernican revolution where suddenly it's all turned upside down.
No, look, it's not that we don't, let me separate the two problems. It's not that we don't know dark matter. We have 5 or 6 theories of dark matter. None of this has been empirically supported enough to say, oh, that's the right one. I mean, it could be a particle, it could be black holes, that's the one I like. It could be a modification of Einstein general relativity. It could be something that you can interpret as a field and also as a particle to connect to so it might easily be that in 5 or 6 years, not far in the future, we say, oh, right, this is the right theory. We had it. It was in the literature. That's about dark matter. And about dark energy, I've written a lot about dark energy. I think it's a very overemphasized problem for, I don't buy this story. We don't know 95% of the content of the universe. I mean, dark matter is a problem. Dark energy is a false problem, in my opinion. I mean, there is a perfectly consistent theory of dark energy, which was written by Einstein in 1917. It's a term in the equation, the cosmological constant. It fits all the data perfectly. It has some problems, but because in the standard model, when you use quantum field theory, you normalize, there are some parameters, not just the cosmological constant, so the mass of the Higgs, that you don't understand well the normalization, but it's a technical issue, which in my opinion is oversold just because, scientists need money to work. So they say, oh, there's a big problem of the cosmological constant. So we're not in a situation, oh, you don't know all that. I mean, of course we don't know plenty of things, but that's normal situation of humankind. We know something and we learn something more.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you Thank you, John. Thank you, Carlo. It's a nice note to end. I know a lot of people are going to be disappointed because there were loads of questions for you, Carlo. I've got one last question because we're all going to play out with a song, and Carlo has chosen a song for us tonight, and it's your favorite song, Carlo. What is the song, and why is it your favorite song?
Janis Joplin, and me and Bobby McGee. It's Janis Joplin version of me and Bobby McGee. Well, it's my favorite song since I was in my 20s because it's a song of being rebellious, being different, going your own way, and there is at the same time the wonder of life and the tragedy of life and the sorrow and the joy all together. I love it, and Janis Joplin is just fantastic.
It's all in there, isn't it? Carlo, thank you so very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your great thinking. And thank you, Tom, for your conversation. Thank you, Mark. Everybody, let's have a big round of applause for Carlo Rovelli.
Bravo! Thank you, thank you, thank you.